June 18, 1936. Clinton Correctional Facility, Dannemora, New York. They called it Little Siberia, the coldest, most isolated maximum security prison in America, built to break men. Lucky Luciano had been inside for exactly 11 days. 11 days since the verdict. 11 days since Thomas Dewey stood in that courtroom and called Lucky the most dangerous criminal in America. 11 days since the judge sentenced him to 30 to 50 years for compulsory prostitution. Outside those walls, the underworld was already moving on. Vito Genovese was telling people Lucky's era was over. Frank Costello was being pressured to choose sides. The commission Lucky had built was fracturing. But on June 18th, Lucky Luciano was granted his first phone call. Prison rules. 10 minutes, 1 call, supervised. Lucky called Meyer Lansky. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Lucky spoke 3 words that would destroy his enemies and prove that real power doesn't need freedom. It needs intelligence. Execute the plan. That's all Meyer needed to hear. Because Lucky and Meyer had prepared for this moment months before the trial even started. They'd seen the setup coming. They'd watched Dewey build his case, intimidate witnesses, manipulate the system. Lucky knew he was going to prison. So he'd built a contingency. A plan so precise, so devastating, that it would operate without him. A plan that would prove Lucky Luciano could run organized crime from a prison cell better than most men could run it from a penthouse. This is the story of how Lucky destroyed Vito Genovese's takeover attempt in 72 hours without leaving his cell. To understand what Lucky did, you need to understand what was happening outside Dannemora in June 1936. Vito Genovese had been Lucky's underboss for years. Loyal, competent, but always ambitious. The moment Lucky went to trial, Genovese started making moves. Small moves. Careful moves. Testing boundaries. He held meetings without Costello. Made decisions about territory. Started talking to the other families about new leadership for a new era. Genovese was smart enough not to openly challenge Lucky. He just let people believe Lucky was finished. Let them assume prison meant the end of Luciano's influence. But Genovese made one fatal mistake. He underestimated Meyer Lansky. Meyer was Lucky's closest advisor, his financial genius, the man who understood money better than anyone in organized crime. Genovese saw Meyer as a bookkeeper, useful but not dangerous. Genovese had no idea Meyer was about to execute the most sophisticated destruction of a mafia boss in history. June 18th, 1936, 4:47 p.m. Meyer Lansky walked into a small restaurant in the garment district. Waiting for him was a man named Joseph Joe Adonis Dotto, one of Genovese's closest allies. Meyer sat down. No pleasantries, no small talk. "Vito's moving against Lucky," Meyer said. Joe shifted uncomfortably. "Meyer, that's not—" "Don't insult me, Joe. I know what Vito's doing. The meetings, the whispers, the positioning. He thinks Lucky being in prison means he can take over. What do you want me to do about it?" Meyer slid an envelope across the table. "I want you to deliver this to Vito. Tell him it's from Lucky. Tell him Lucky knows everything. And tell him Lucky's giving him one chance to stop." Joe didn't open the envelope. "And if he doesn't stop? Then what's in that envelope becomes public. And Vito will be finished." What Joe didn't know was that envelope contained something devastating. Documents, financial records, evidence that Vito Genovese had been skimming money from the families for years. Lucky and Meyer had been collecting this evidence for 18 months. They'd known Genovese was stealing. They'd let him do it. Because they understood something fundamental. Information is more valuable than immediate action. They'd waited, documented everything, built an irrefutable case. And now, with Lucky in prison and Genovese making his move, it was time to use it. June 19th, 1936. 11:00 a.m. Joe Adonis delivered the envelope to Vito Genovese at a social club in Little Italy. Genovese opened it, read the first page. His face went white. Inside were copies of ledgers showing Genovese had stolen over $400,000 from commission operations. Money that should have been distributed to all 5 families. Money Genovese had diverted to his own accounts. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part was the note attached. Vito. These copies go to every family boss in 48 hours unless you stop. You will resign as underboss. You will leave New York. You will not return until I say otherwise. You have 1 day to decide. Lucky. Genovese sat in stunned silence. This was impossible. Lucky was in prison. How could he still have this kind of power? But Joe Adonis was standing there, waiting for an answer. And Genovese realized something terrifying. Lucky had planned this. Before the trial, before prison, Lucky had set this trap, knowing Genovese would walk into it. Genovese looked at Joe. Tell Meyer I need to meet with him. Meyer's not meeting with you. You get 1 chance to do what Lucky said. After that, the evidence goes public. If that evidence goes public, I'll be killed. I know, Joe said quietly. That's the point. This was Lucky's genius. He didn't threaten Genovese with violence. He threatened him with exposure. Because if the families found out Genovese had been stealing, they wouldn't wait for permission. They'd kill him themselves. Genovese had 2 choices: leave New York or die. He chose to leave. June 20th, 1936. Vito Genovese boarded a ship to Italy. He told people he was taking care of business overseas. But everyone in the underworld knew the truth. Lucky Luciano had forced him out. From a prison cell. With 1 phone call. In 72 hours. But Lucky wasn't finished. Because Genovese leaving solved 1 problem but created another. Who would run things while Lucky was inside? Lucky had already decided. Frank Costello. Frank was political, diplomatic, careful. He wouldn't try to take over. He'd keep the system stable until Lucky could run things directly from prison, which Lucky absolutely intended to do. On June 21st, Meyer Lansky visited Lucky in Dannemora. They had 30 minutes in a private meeting room, supposedly to discuss legal appeals. Instead, they discussed the future of organized crime. Vito's gone, Meyer said. Took the ship to Naples yesterday. Good. How did the families react? Confused at first. But when I explained that Vito was stealing and you'd caught him, they understood. Nobody questioned it. Lucky nodded. And Frank? Frank's ready. He'll run day-to-day operations. I'll handle the money. Everything runs through me, and I report to you. The commission needs to know I'm still in control, Lucky said. Even from here. They will. I'm scheduling a meeting next week. All 5 families. I'll make it clear. Decisions go through you. Anyone who has a problem with that can say so, and we'll handle it. Lucky smiled. Nobody's going to have a problem. They just saw what happens when someone challenges me. Vito thought prison made me weak. Now he's in exile. What happened next was unprecedented in mafia history. Lucky Luciano ran organized crime from prison for the next 9 years. Meyer Lansky visited every week, bringing reports, seeking approval for major decisions. Frank Costello executed Lucky's orders. The commission continued to function exactly as Lucky designed it. Prison didn't diminish Lucky's power. If anything, it enhanced his legend. Because now everyone knew you couldn't stop Lucky Luciano by putting him in a cage. But the story of Vito Genovese wasn't over. Genovese spent the next 9 years in Italy, seething with resentment. When World War II started, Genovese aligned himself with the fascists, hoping to build a new power base. But Lucky had allies everywhere. In 1944, when Allied forces liberated Italy, Genovese was arrested as a fascist collaborator. He was brought back to New York to face murder charges. The charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. Witnesses mysteriously disappeared. But everyone knew Lucky had arranged it. Genovese came back to New York humiliated, weakened, with no power base. Lucky, meanwhile, had negotiated his release from prison in 1946 by helping the U.S. military with intelligence during the war. The government commuted his sentence on the condition he be deported to Italy. Lucky left America, but not the organization. He ran the commission from Naples for another 16 years until his death in 1962. And Vito Genovese? He spent the rest of his life trying to reclaim the power he'd lost in those 72 hours in June 1936. He'd eventually become boss of his family in the 1950s. But he'd never recover what Lucky took from him: respect. Because the underworld remembered. They remembered that Genovese had tried to take over while Lucky was down. And they remembered that Lucky destroyed him with one phone call. Meyer Lansky said years later in an interview, "People ask me how Lucky ran things from prison. Simple. He'd already built the system. All he had to do was protect it. And Lucky was the best at protection I ever saw. Not with guns, with information." That phone call on June 18th, 1936, wasn't just about destroying Genovese. It was about sending a message to everyone in organized crime. Lucky Luciano's power didn't come from his freedom. It came from his mind. Prison walls couldn't contain that. 3 words, 72 hours, one man exiled, another's legend secured. Lucky Luciano proved that night in Dannemora what he'd always believed: the man who controls information controls everything. Genovese controlled soldiers. Lucky controlled the truth. And truth, when used correctly, is more destructive than any army.